Welcome back to Vivid Noise, and today I want to spend a little bit of time talking about New Super Mario Bros. Wii. It'd be pretty redundant of me to talk about the actual quality of the game because, come on, it's a 2D Mario platformer. Of course, it's pretty good. What I want to focus on a little bit more is the game's approach to level design, the way it incorporates the Wiimote in a non-intrusive sort of way, and some more meta aspects that extend beyond the game itself. Despite the fact that this is a Mario game, it hasn't escaped criticism, with the main critique being that the level design is a little bit too open, mainly to accommodate 4 players. I personally don't see that as much of a problem. There's something refreshing about a Mario game with much more open level designs, at least in terms of the amount of space you have to run around. There definitely are moments in some of the levels where things get a little bit uninspired, but I believe that Nintendo did ultimately make the right choice, since it's better to design a game that suffers just a little bit because of multiplayer than to have the multiplayer suffer severely because of the single player, especially considering that these kind of games are most fun with couch co-op. This is the sort of decision that you would ultimately call a compromise, but compromises aren't always a bad thing. It's simply a fact that it's almost impossible to create level design that perfectly accommodates both a single player and 4 players at the same time, especially when player collision is enabled. So unless they dedicated a substantial amount of resources to just creating levels for multiplayer, I couldn't have imagined this going any other way. Compromises or not, I still feel like the level design is worthy of praise. While it might not be quite as creative or even ambitious as something like Mario Free or Mario World or Mario World 2, or even New Super Mario Bros. DS, which felt very fresh at the time, it still offers gameplay that moves at an incredibly good pace, and the placement of the star coins is right on that edge between being a little bit cryptic and also being completely findable entirely on your own. My only major problem with the levels themselves is the occasional gimmick stage, if you know what I mean, like riding on a boat that stops if you have too much stuff on it, or having to illuminate the stage with these glowing blocks. I get why Nintendo still continues to use these kind of tropes because it breaks up the monotony a little bit, and fortunately they're not too prevalent as to just completely ruin the game and label it a gimmick platformer like some games tend to be, but I still can't say that I was the biggest fan of them. Moving on to the Wiimote implementation, and this is where New Super Mario Bros. Wii dodged a bullet. The Wii was infamous for both first and third-party games that didn't have GameCube or even classic controller support, which in retrospect are now almost unplayable unless you really fiddle with Dolphin settings, actually buy a real Wii or buy a Wiimote and hook it up to your PC. I understand that Nintendo were not thinking about that at the time and probably don't want you thinking about it right now, but it's just a fact that these kind of things date a game almost irreparably. Forget presentation, forget writing, forget tone, none of those things matter. When the gameplay and fundamental controls start to suffer, that's when we have a problem. Fortunately, New Super Mario Bros. Wii does not have that problem at all. Its basic controls are entirely on the Wiimote itself. You know, left, right, 1 and 2 to jump and run, with the only motion controls being incredibly simple actions that can easily be recreated nowadays. For example, shaking the Wiimote to pick up certain objects or use the propeller hat, or tilting the Wiimote left and right to interact with those moving platforms. Aside from that though, you pretty much forget that you're playing a Wii game, and that's a very good thing in my book. I almost find it ironic how the game avoided being dated in this way, that being the controls, and yet Nintendo still found a way to make this game that came out in 2009 feel like it came out in 1989, and that would be the save system. Apparently Nintendo thought that it was still 1996 and the Crash Bandicoot save system was the best thing on the planet, because for whatever reason you can't seem to save at any time. Like, yes, you have these little quick saves which are temporary, but if you want to save the game properly, you have to beat a castle level, which, like, okay, they're pretty easy. You just do the first one again, it's not a big deal, but why? Like, I just can't possibly understand why they would ever make such a decision in their save system. It doesn't ruin the game or anything, especially since we now have save states, but still, it's just mind-boggling that it happened to begin with. Okay, that's my little rant out of the way, but now I want to talk about a slightly more meta aspect of this game that I find strangely appealing, even though I don't think I'm supposed to. So it pretty much goes without question that Mario is the face of video games, right? He is Mr. Video Game. While his games might not be universally the most successful out of any franchise, that might have to be GTA, he is unequivocally the most recognized. You know, he's the Mickey Mouse of games. And with that status, obviously comes the stigma of him just being an extremely corporate brand. Because you know what it's like when you have a mascot and you got the big smile and everything, but it just feels fake. What's strange to me about a lot of Mario's games actually is that he doesn't really succumb to that. Like, yes, I understand that that what I'm playing is a product made by a multi-trillion gazillion dollar company and naturally doesn't have that sort of intrinsic charm that a lower budget game would have, and yet I still find myself sort of smiling along. Especially the new Super Mario Bros. Games are kind of like the video game equivalent to fast food, but it's made with your grandma's recipe, if that makes sense. So it feels like it came out of a factory, but with love still put into it. It all sounds very contradictory, and it's maybe just a me thing, but that is just how I feel when I play these games. I guess it also helps that Mario is a video game franchise, which is something that is interactive and has an almost utilitarian sort of function in the way that you are entertained. This isn't like with music or movies or writing where there has to be artistic integrity. No, honestly, artistic integrity, while I do believe it can be an aspect of a game, it doesn't necessarily have to be there for you to have a good time. You can play something that is made with the sole purpose of squeezing every last dollar out of you, and if it actually has decent gameplay and, okay presentation, it can still be a fairly good time compared to, let's say, listening to an incredibly vapid or shallow piece of music, or a movie with no real narrative, or just a story with no end purpose. In comparison, video games don't really pretend to be that much more. Some of them will and can be a little pretentious, but you can still absolutely get some value out of a game that's just, hey look, here's some levels. Have fun. Lastly, in my opinion, New Super Mario Bros. Wii has actually managed to do something that I almost thought was impossible, and that is to remain worthwhile as a gameplay experience, even though it belongs to an iterative series that has since been superseded by, in this case, Mario Wonder. It is without question that Mario Wonder is an overall better package than any of the New Super Mario Bros. Games, and despite that, I feel like it hasn't necessarily replaced any of them. Like, yes, I would still recommend you play Wonder over any of the four, but when you're done, if you want a little bit more, then you can go and play those too, because they're similar but have their own touch. Be it the presentation or be it the level design, they are not the same, even though they are incredibly similar. Although the case of certain games being made obsolete is most common within annual franchises like sports games or shooters, it totally can still happen with platformers. Like, for example, Sonic Generations, especially on PC, has effectively replaced Unleashed because you don't have the Werehog stages and you can just mod all of the daytime levels back in. The only thing you'd be missing is some subtle little graphical touches, which I'm sure can also be modded back in. I guess what I'm trying to say is that sometimes more of the same can be totally fine, as long as it's justified by some unique content and presentation. Now, if New Super Mario Bros. U, for example, literally just ripped stages from Wii, then yeah, it would be a problem. That's probably the reason why I find Rayman Legends to kind of be a replacement for Origins, because a lot of the best levels from Origins are playable in Legends, plus all of the new levels that game adds. And with that, I'm gonna wrap up another episode of Vivid Noise. Thank you so much for watching once again, and I'll see you guys at the next one.